We have a number of books coming up. Hopefully we will have our new edition, Blueprint for Black Power, at the latter part of November. I know I promised you 600 pages. We're going to give you a bonus. We're going to give you 800 pages.
All right.
So that'll take you through the winter. And even those 800 pages are surveys. Because, I'm amazed sometimes we expect to define our problems and deal with our problems in 25 words or less. And we expect people to write little books sometimes because we sometimes haven't gotten over the idea that we are little people. So little books and short books, should be sufficient when you're dealing with issues having to deal with black folk, and that's not true. We are as complicated, and our needs are as complicated as any other people on this earth, and in many ways more so, given the conditions that we are in. And if other peoples and nations require libraries of hundreds and thousands of books, then so do we. And if other nations and people have to write sometimes large books, so do we, because our problems are large. Blueprint for Black Power is going to cover a lot of territory. It covers, of course, history, sociology, political science, because we're going to be talking about power. What is power? How is it achieved? How is the power structure in this country organized? We're going to talk about global capitalism, the New World Order, in which the world essentially will not be run by governments, but will be run by corporations. We talk about this situation such as this country, which essentially has two governments, and the one that you see in Washington is not necessarily the most important one. It essentially is a nation that's run by private capital and by corporations. Its chief instrument of power is a private corporation, the so-called Federal Reserve. People think it's a government agency because it's called federal. A system of private finance and private bankers to whom the Congress has ceded control over the environment, over the economy. They determine then the nature of the economic system of America. These private people, not the people you elect. This is one reason why I keep warning you that power is not in elective politics. You can vote all you want to. You're not going to have any real power in this country. Because the power is in the hand of people who are never elected. The owners of property and the owners of wealth, the controllers of corporations and the controllers of major institutions who survive and continue to exist as presidents move in and out of office and as governments change. They are the permanent government. And essentially the government that you elect is the government that they use to do their bidding. And yet we have some people who deceive us into making us think that through voting we are going to achieve power. That is a deception. You achieve power by gaining control over resources. Yes, owning and controlling. Now we are seeing finance capital and corporate capital not only controlling the United States, but moving in a position to control the world itself. We don't have time to talk about a lot of these things. NAFTA, the GATT, conferences, those so-called agreements, trade agreements. But you only need to ask yourself, who are the trade? Who's involved in the trade agreements, and who's going to be involved in the trade? Are you going to be involved in the trade with Mexico? So how does a trade agreement of us with Mexico, us with Canada, how do we as a people get into the mix of trade will be doing the trading? It will be corporations, not owned by us, not controlled by us, and for whom often we are less and less even working. So we are confronted with major situations. The largest percentage of African nations are under the control of private capital right now, indebted to private capital. They have yet to achieve real autonomy and real independence. Their destiny yet rests in the hands of white men. You hear people talking about a free market, right? Free market economics, open market. There's no such thing as a free market or an open market. That's stuff black people believe. And they're the only people who believe it. The only people who believe in something called a free market or an open market. When we talk about the black nation, we can talk about the ideology, the economic ideology of black people. We have an economic ideology. Simply because you may not talk about economics in high tones and with the vocabulary of economists does not mean that you do not have an economic ideology. Your ideology can either be explicit or implicit, maybe even unknown to you, but you still have it. There are not people who walk and eat and sleep and buy and sell and so forth who are not involved in an economy and who are not involved in an economic ideology. That's why often you need to bring your ideology to the surface and see exactly what it is, what it's about. Simply because you may not have read economic books or went to economic classes does not mean that you are not involved in an ideological orientation toward economics. And black people have an economic ideology that on the surface appears to resemble that of white people, and it doesn't. We hear white people talking about free market, a market economy, an open market. In fact, in one of the chapters in the upcoming book, I talk about what I call the tyranny of the free market. How the free market is imposed on people. If you remember, who was it, Admiral Perry or someone, who went over there and forced the Japanese into the free market. You know, and you find the whole movement of colonialism and so forth was a process of what? Forcing people into a market, not saying, oh, you have a choice. You can come in if you want to, if you don't want to. Castro being what? Forced into a so-called free market. Russia being forced into a so-called free market. Wars created and generated to bring people into a so-called free market. How is it free if you're forced into it? If you choose not to be in it, you're embargoed and blocked from trade and so forth. How is it free? We're not free to choose the economy that we wish to choose. It's forced upon us, and we have to face that. And we have to face the fact that that economy is run, you see, by a specific group of people. Because you can hide a lot of things using terms like free market. It sounds neutral. A truly free market, you see, wouldn't allow any racial discrimination whatsoever. The minute you get any discrimination based on anything other than the fact that you got something to sell and something to buy, you're not in the free market. And black people have never been in the free market. The vast majority of people have not been. What is a market? It's simply a place, a circumstance where people buy and sell, where they engage in the process of buying